You are about to listen to a new episode of the Redefining CyberSecurity Podcast with Sean Martin. Have you ever thought we're selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Well, perhaps we are. Let's look at how we can organize a successful information security program that integrates business culture with people, process, and technology to drive growth and protect business value.
Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new Redefining CyberSecurity Podcast. You're on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, your host, who I am fortunate to get to talk with some really cool people in really cool roles, and this time in really cool places. Andrew Morgan's joining me from down under. He woke up this morning to join me in my evening time adventures. He's got the future of what's going on because he's a day ahead of me. And we're going to talk a little bit about what he's seeing in the cybersecurity space in Australia and in the region in general, perhaps, and talk about a topic that I think is near and dear to his heart: the haves and have-nots in cyber. We'll discuss what that means. Andrew, it's so good to have you on, my friend.
Thank you so much, Sean, and I'm very pleased and feel very privileged to be here. So thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate you taking the time out of a busy schedule, of course. So we connected on LinkedIn, and it was around the CyberCon time, and I think you were part of another event where CISOs got together and talked about some things. And while we won't name names and mention companies, we'll get into some of what you're hearing, plus your own experiences, of course.
Sure.
On the street there in Australia. And but before we get into that, perhaps a few words about your role, what you're up to, and maybe connections to the cyber community.
Thanks, Sean. Look, I suppose I came into cyber in a slightly very different way to most people. I started off my life in the police here in Victoria. I wasn't involved in cyber or forensics or anything at that stage. I was just a detective, and my speciality was transnational organised crime. So I spent most of my career in the police force, investigating things like mafia, Chinese triads, Japanese yakuza, all of those kind of things. And eventually, my very wise wife told me that it was time to probably grow up a little bit. I couldn't run around and have fun chasing gangsters all my life. So it was probably the right decision. And when I left the police force, I moved through a number of different roles and ended up consulting, doing sort of financial crime, risk advisory and stuff like that for some of the big consulting firms. And somehow or another managed to morph into a computer forensics, DFIR kind of career for about 10 years, where I was very heavily hands-on, pulling apart computers and imaging drives and searching for how and when things happened on those computers and that kind of thing. And in about 2014, I was given an opportunity to go and set up that kind of a forensics function for our national broadband network company here at NBN. And I did that, and NBN were fantastic to me, gave me lots of opportunities to look at a whole range of different things. So I took that kind of core skill set, moved around the GRC side of cyber at NBN, and then ended up running the security operations side of things, which was a real eye-opener for me. We were fortunate that we had good resources, lots of good backing, great culture, fantastic leadership. So I got exposed to a whole lot of things there. And then I kind of decided it was about time to maybe go out and have a look at being the boss myself. So I went to one of their universities, La Trobe University, and started their cybersecurity program as their first ever CISO, which was a real eye-opener. That's sort of where we come to the haves and have-nots. And then more recently, I went over to an industry-specific health insurance fund as their sort of first head of cybersecurity and risk, similar sort of thing. So, it's been an interesting career. I've had lots and lots of fun, but at the moment, I'm having a little, what I think is a well-deserved break, and doing some really interesting things outside of the cyber world, and doing a lot of learning at the same time. Just sort of trying to make sure I'm keeping myself up to date with what's going on, and not get drowned in the tsunami of stuff that's happening around the place. So I'm busy, but I'm having fun.
That's good. Having fun is important, and
I think so.
Meaningful work is important, but you can't kill yourself in the process of doing meaningful work.
Look, I've got a very strong philosophy that if you can afford to take a break and totally cut off from the pressures of that work environment, sometimes I think it's a really good thing. Not everybody's fortunate enough to be able to do it. I'm in a really fortunate position at the moment that I can, and I think it's a very healthy thing to do for people.
So I'm going to put my question out there, and then I'm going to take a diversion. My question is going to go back to your view of kind of fighting gangsters and looking at that whole world of risk, and then you come in and you play around in the GRC space, and then you move to security ops, and then into a CISO role. And my connection is going to be, what do you know more about risk now that you have? So I'm going to come back and ask that question, but I'm going to go with something more fun quickly,
right?
Because you have quite a lineup behind you, my friend. And that to me seems like more fun than anything. What do you have back there in guitars?
So I've got a Harmony Rocket, which is a guitar that I'm told Keith Richards from the Stones was one of the guitars he used very early days in the Stones. There's a Fender Telecaster, Stratocaster, Gibson SG, the world's most horrible bass guitar, and a couple of acoustic guitars.
I love it.
And they're all gathering dust, unfortunately, because
that's not what I want to hear. That's not what I want to hear, Andrew.
It's one of my plans. I
want to hear that you pick it up a few minutes every day. I try to do that. I have one sitting right there myself. But anyway, so we can talk music all day long too. I think it's important
Absolutely.
I think what I find is a lot of security people also play, funny enough.
I've found quite a few, and found a lot of people way more talented than I'm ever going to be. I'm just a battler having a crack, as one of my old bosses used to say.
It's about, for me, it's about the feeling I get when I pick up a guitar or the drums or whatever keyboard or whatever it is I'm messing around. All right, so back to the other fun. Any insights on how we look at risk or should look at risk differently now, since you've had a role in security operations and response / CISO, looking at the big picture? Do you think, as a general rule, do we have a good picture of how to manage risk, or are we missing the mark somewhere?
I think, look, it's a great question, and it's the one that I don't necessarily struggle with it, because I've given it a lot of thought over the journey, and I've certainly got my philosophy and my approach as to how I consider risk and how I sort of overlay that back on the business. And one of the things I do is I try and create mantras or little sound bites that will kind of resonate and stick in people's heads, because if I start to talk to people about threat landscapes and attack surfaces and all of the other jargon that's out there, non-cyber folk eyes roll back in their head and they just go, no, you don't get it. So I talk about creating programs that are driven by culture, informed by risk, and then delivered through people, process, and technology. Risk for me is the centerpiece, or governance, risk, and compliance really is the centerpiece. And what I find is, tragically, in Australia, and it's not maybe tragically, this is just a case of where we're at from a maturity perspective as an industry, but cyber has always been seen as a subset of the IT business. IT in a lot of places is kind of the sort of the ugly red-headed child sitting off in a corner. It doesn't get to play with the big kids or anything like that. And I find probably a little bit too often the approach to cyber is talking to vendors, talking amongst the community of other very, very like-minded people with very similar backgrounds. And the default position for uplifting capability and managing risk is buying the next new tool, probably poorly deploying it, ending up with a whole lot of tooling that does the same or similar things, massive overlaps, unknown gaps, underutilized investment, all sorts of things. Never once looking at the idea of what are the things that we do in this business that we love that keeps us here? What's the core reason for existing? And then what are the things that could and are likely to impact those kinds of assets from sort of the how do you get in, how do you sort of disrupt that particular asset, and looking at the likelihood and the consequence of those particular things happen. So kind of a threat modeling approach, and then trying to be very quantitative about what does that risk look like. So what could that possibly look like in dollar terms? That quantitative piece is really, really hard. I've seen people use different approaches, but I don't know that anybody's really nailed.
Yeah, math is hard.
Yeah. I'm no good with that.
Because I don't know, when you don't know what the inputs and outputs are, you can do all the math you want and not know if you're getting anything right.
Yeah.
So you started to touch on a little bit there, kind of the state of cyber in Australia. You spoke to it in the context of maturity level, and it's a subset of IT. How do you? What are some of the conversations with your fellow peers, CISO, security leaders, maybe driven or drawn from the two meetings that we touched on earlier on, the CyberCon event and the CISO event? Maybe an overview of the CISO event as well, because I think that's an interesting thing that was done there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll mention that CISO event. It was that there's a group that's actually sort of been put together by one of the security organizations at a commercial consulting company. And the wonderful thing they've done is they've put together what they call a tribe of Australian-based CISOs. So they've limited the membership to 200 of us, and we're absolutely full. We've got a waiting list a mile long for people that want to join this particular tribe. And it's a wonderful, wonderful place, incredibly active community where we talk about a whole range of different things through WhatsApp and regular meetings and all sorts of things. The chats that go on and the sharing that goes on is really amazing. What I've seen is most of those 200 in the sort of small to medium business segment, education, healthcare, all of those kind of things. The really big enterprise players like the big four banks, telcos, and those kind of things are not represented in this group, which is, I think we're missing something a little bit there. The chief security officers and CISOs of those big ones most of them are in another group that I'm aware of. But at the moment, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two. So our CISO group tends to talk more about the issues facing that sort of next segment down underneath enterprise. Now, I've waffled about that. I've forgotten the other part of the question. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I want to talk about the state of or level of maturity, but I want to, maybe we'll come back to that, because I think you're starting to lead into two groups, which may be the haves and have-nots.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's me trying to force something there, but it sounds like the big enterprise generally have what they need in terms of an understanding and capabilities, and they have the option to build teams and buy tech and
Yeah.
hopefully use it in a good way. And then the public sector and schools and small, medium businesses are kind of left to deal with it on their own. And groups or the tribe like this may help, but it doesn't solve all the problems. So maybe let's touch on that, and then we can kind of go back to the maturity
Yeah,
level.
no, look, this is a thing that I'm quite passionate about. The two events that we sort of touched on, one is this informal group of Australian-based CISOs called the Australian CISO Tribe, or CISO AU CISO Tribe. It's been put together and is run by one of the security consulting companies, but they do a wonderful job of not allowing their desire to sell security services to impact on this environment they've set up. We do get some events sponsored by different vendors, but they're not in the room during our conversations. They do come in, they get a small slot to be able to come and talk about what it is that they're doing. But again, that doesn't invade on the kind of the sanctity of this group of CISOs. There's 200 of us around the country. We've capped the membership at 200, and we've got a waiting list a mile long. So it's a very, very successful initiative, and I'm really, really pleased and proud to be part of that. And the membership is generally at the sort of the small to medium enterprise. So, they're still big businesses. There's still businesses doing, up to sort of, $500 million in revenue a year. So it's not like we're talking about small places. Or even bigger than that, I think. And so we have regular meetings. We've got a very, very, very active number of chat channels that we have for sort of general conversations, talk about different products and services and vendors out there and what they're doing and the experiences that we've had and what does work, what doesn't work. We make sort of recommendations around what's been trouble for us in a particular initiative we might have had. We share a lot of resources. We've got sort of a threat intelligence channel and a representative from the government who comes in and shares some pretty early intelligence with us around a range of different things. If we've got staff who are kind of looking for their next role, or we're looking for a particular kind of person, we can put that out there as well. So we've got this really active, really positive, really valuable network going on. And one of the things we did a couple of weeks ago was we had, just before the ACES CyberCon, because we knew we would have a lot of people in Melbourne, we held an end of year dinner for the Melbourne chapter. And we had, it was 40 or 50 CISOs in the room for that dinner. Again, booked out to capacity for the room that we were in. And we had a couple of different sort of discussions during that dinner about sort of what had happened during the year and those kind of sort of normal end of year wrap up things. But we were really privileged to have Australia's cybersecurity coordinator, Lieutenant General Michelle McGuinness, come and speak to us. And I'd not seen Michelle speak before, and I came away from it absolutely sort of mind blown as far as the way in which she approached her subject and her discussion with us, her willingness to listen, her willingness to give really good advice to us as to things that we could and should be doing, and great insight as to how government and the business community can work together to better outcomes. She spoke a lot about what the government agencies are seeing as far as sort of nation state actors and sort of the current state of geopolitics and the kind of horrid mess that the world is kind of in. But she also brought that back to what was near and dear to us, which is we've got our own little pieces of the world that we're trying to protect, and what are the things that her agency and the Australian government are seeing as far as causation and sort of root cause analysis to give us insights as to the kind of things that we should be having and doing, compared and contrasted them with the CyberCon that went on for 3 days after that, where we had a lot of presentations from kind of the big end of town. And there's there's so much we can learn from the really big, really well resourced programs and, heavily regulated and scrutinized, critical infrastructure kind of places, because they've had to develop and get to a level of capability and a level of maturity really, really quickly to meet their obligations. So there's this enormous learning opportunity from them as well, but it's trying to then scale the top end of town down to what it is that we have down in the sort of the next segments down. So small, medium enterprise, education, for profits, all of those kinds of places, which in a lot of times are really guarding some really sensitive and precious information. So, that's kind of the compare and contrast between the two. And it's something that the World Economic Forum are well aware of. Last year's World Economic Cyber Report absolutely highlighted this massive and growing gap between essentially what they're calling the haves and the have-nots. And the fact that a significant cyber breach in the have-nots is far, far more likely to shut down that organisation forever. And that's the bit that I think is particularly worrying.
Yeah. So what? So clearly, you're passionate about this topic, and something we want to touch on here. What are your thoughts on how we start to? I don't know if we can ever bridge that gap, but maybe get closer. Right, bring two sides of the river close to each other. Yeah, because I mean, we're never going to take a data center driven SOC and drop it into a public school, right? It's just it's not physically possible, let alone all the rest of it.
No,
but to your point, things we can learn. So what do you see happening? What are your ideas on how to make some progress there?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some really good reference material out there. So you've got the IBM cost of a data breach report, the Verizon reports. There's a whole lot of material out there that talks to what are the things that are happening locally and globally. And even speaking with Michelle McGuinness and her talking about the causative issues around cyber breaches that they are seeing, her advice was, in Australia, we don't do our basic hygiene, security hygiene things well enough. So they're your really basic things that just aren't sexy. And anybody that tells you that security is sexy is probably not doing it well enough, because it's like police work. It sounds so much fun until you realize it's just one step, then the next step, then the next step. If you jump 3 or 4 steps, you're going to run into trouble. And if you get that sort of adrenaline rush from dealing with the trouble, that's fantastic. But we can't be cowboys all the time. If we take one step and the next step and logically and sequentially understand the things that we care about and put the right kinds of controls around them and make sure the controls are relevant to the way we are most likely to be attacked or compromised, we're probably dealing with that idea of risk so much better and protecting the things that matter so much better. So it's the really boring, dull things. It's everything. Put proper phishing-resistant protocols in place, phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Just log everything. If I could tell anybody in SME land, if I had to do everything from sort of identify threats, that sort of NIST cybersecurity framework pillars, it's a wonderful, fun thing to look at who are the bad guys and what are they doing and all of that kind of thing. But can I detect something that gets into my organisation? Can I prevent it in the first place? If I do detect it, can I quarantine it? Can I push it out? And the main thing is, can I actually then get my business back and going? And I think we look at the sort of the sexy side of identify and detect and do all those really great, fun things. At the end of the day, I think business continuity and disaster recovery they're the things that we can know. I can't necessarily stop a really, really motivated, well-resourced bad guy from getting into an organization. I may not be able to detect it. I may not have the resources to respond to it well. I need to be able to sleep at night knowing that everything turns to poo. I can get that business back up, and I know how long it's going to take. I know the order that I need to do things, and everybody understands that.
Yeah, and I think, I see the pendulum swing. I've been doing this 30 years. The pendulum swing back and forth over the years, where protection is king, and then response and recovery is king. And yeah, I was joking with a buddy the other day.
The question, and where do you think we are?
I think, interestingly enough, I think it was the last few years, maybe 2-3 years ago, was very endpoint detection focused. And I've seen a lot happen with SIM and SOAR, with a push for a response and some automation there to alleviate some of the grunt work, if you will, so that better response can be had. Yeah, and I think to your point on the hygiene, I don't know. That's what I was going to say. I was joking with a buddy of mine the other day of a big yellow company I used to work for. I don't know how many backup companies they bought while I worked there for them, and they still don't have one. And I think they even bought a big company that effectively operationally took them over, and they were a backup company, and they still don't have it. Anyway, my point is, even that basic hygiene of backup and recovery as part of a resilience program still seems to miss the mark. So, and I think one last thing I'll say is kind of AI is changing a lot.
Yes.
In that I see it potentially as a way to kind of string a lot of things together, from detection to response. If somebody's looking at it that way, I still think we're in a world of, we have all these different categories, and every vendor's throwing AI at their particular piece, and it's still very siloed. But ultimately, I think AI might flow there. I don't know. Any thoughts on what I said?
Yeah, no, look, I think you're 100% on the mark, and backups and backup recovery is, it's a really interesting thing. And what I think is one of the challenges is, we go in front of our boards and, regulators, and we say, yes, we do backups, and we've got MFA, and, we do patching, and boards and regulators go, that's fantastic. When you really sort of peel back the layers of the onions, you find out that, we don't necessarily back up everything, because some things are hard. We haven't tested backups, like properly tested them, for maybe 2 or 3 years. We don't require phishing resistant complex passwords, phrases, biometrics, something like that. And I've got a list of 200 employees that dried up when we rolled out multi-factor authentication. So they're in the not needed to do multi-factor authentication list. And we've got service accounts and all sorts of things just floating around all over the place that are pretty easy to get to once you're inside or quite determined, and pretty easy to compromise. So those things are really tricky, and you're right. AI can really, really help there. But I think one thing I've been playing around with is the idea that we talk about the human, but still being this sort of really pivotal piece in cybersecurity, because it's still a person on a screen. The most common thing that we see is a person get tricked through maybe an AI-generated really good phishing email, and they go somewhere and the whole world turns to rubbish on you, and then it's your worst day. Awareness training, I still think, is in its very early stages of maturity. So, we've got phishing drills. They're fantastic. They are getting better again. We can generate really lifelike phishing drills. Really good. What organisations then do with those results is a separate thing, but specific education awareness, cultural uplift, I think, comes from meeting people where they are at. So, having a 2-minute video saying, Bob pressed on a bad link, don't be like Bob. Not super effective, not super sticky. We can't get in front of everybody often enough. But one of the things I've started playing with is AI is out there, fantastic. And what if I was going around to all of the different business units in my organisation, and we talk about cyber champions and that kind of thing, but if I had a go-to person in each of those different parts of the business, I can start to create lifelike avatars of each of those people. So we bring them in. And what I want to do is create tailored education and awareness content delivered by somebody that those recipients engage with in a way that's real to them. So using the avatar approach, I'm not calling on people's resources too much. I've got a really engaging way of being able to then pump relevant content into those people. So it might be call center people, totally different education and awareness program to my devs. So the devs might need a particular kind of technical delivery. The networking people need something else. I can start to use that AI to create stickiness and relevance that you could never do before. So,
Yep.
And it costs you next to nothing.
Yeah. I love the idea. Yeah, because content, the devs environment is different than HR, different than legal. They use their own apps. They have their own language. They think a certain way. They drink Mountain Dew and have hoodies on. I'm joking, but no, I think context and relevance and familiarity. If you have a relationship and you can scale that virtually, that sounds really cool. I want to touch on another area because I know the U.S. government spent a lot putting together kind of a secure by design program out of CISA, and I don't know that that's living on at the moment, regardless of the shutdown. I think maybe that the team and that whole program is not up and running anymore.
Yeah.
But the concept is there, and then it goes kind of back to the risk thing of if you don't expose yourself in the first place, then you don't have to worry about getting frostbite, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering. I'm wondering. I know it's summertime there, but so you're not worried about frostbite at the moment. It's raining everywhere today. It's funny enough. Everybody I talk to, it's raining. But the idea of if you build the business and you stack it properly with the right tech, configured in the right way with the right policies, you can alleviate a lot of need around monitoring and detection and putting protections on it and responding to stuff. And I use the example of patch management. If you're using a piece of tech that you're having to patch 20 times a week and it's not critical to the business, or there's a different piece or player or vendor you can plug in there that doesn't require 20 patches a week, maybe you make that decision as a business. We do that all the time in other areas of business. So what do you say to that in terms of maturity level and readiness to be secure by design in Australia? Where do we sit?
I'm really glad that you've sort of brought that concept of vulnerability management, patch management into the conversation, because that's another one of those hygiene issues. And you're right, the top level generic advice is patch application, patch OS, patch bloody everything. And you're right. Then if you are purely on the technical side and don't necessarily buy into the business process improvement side of things, you may just get into this rut of, we've run a scan, we've got 10,000 vulnerabilities. I need to produce a report that says I've moved them down in a particular time frame. So we're just going to push out patches left, right, and centre. We've got patching windows. This is what we'll do. that the context of am I making protection for my business better doesn't necessarily exist. And the concept of, okay, we've got a vulnerability, but is that in something that we care about or need to care about? I think that's kind of the magic sauce in all things vulnerability management. Really tricky. And you're absolutely right. I think if you are using a piece of tech that's kind of flaky, end of life, not necessarily compatible with a whole lot of other things, old generation tech, whatever it might be, and it's constantly needing to be upgraded, then is it time to then look at, do we upgrade that particular piece of tech? I'm a big fan of simplified where you can, particularly the sort of the non-enterprise businesses, because it's really hard to be an expert in everything. So, Microsoft, bless them, that they are pretty good at a whole lot of things. They're not necessarily the best in anything from a security perspective, but anybody that's been in the game for a while has seen them come from nothing from 10 years ago. They were terrible at security, produced good operating systems and Office type programs. Fantastic. They're a fairly good security organization now. What nobody has is the breadth of coverage that they've got. I can look at endpoint protection. The Defender tools may not go as deep as some of the other vendors out there. Data loss prevention they can do, but maybe other vendors are better. But I don't know anybody that's got the breadth of coverage. So again, if I'm a smaller organization, does that simplify things for me? Does it give me the most up-to-date, most robust, best breadth of coverage? And if I really understand the risks to my business and I can see that we're a bit light on in endpoint, I can supplement that with another tool if that's what I need to do. But once I start to look at that simplification platform kind of approach, it also leads to probably a more efficient way of keeping things up to date from a protected perspective around patching and things like that. Whereas when you've got 30 pieces of tech, trying to keep up to date with all of that, I think it's a big challenge for any organisation, let alone one that's resource constrained.
Yeah. And on that same vein,
and I'm not picking Microsoft there.
Yeah, absolutely not. I didn't hear that. But I'm just wondering. So forget who the entity is that has a broad view of things, and maybe what I'm really looking toward is, are there, I don't know, call them a VAR, call them a service provider. I'm just wondering. So Microsoft, whoever has a big stack, it crosses a lot of the operational bits of the business and can give some intersection of those elements of the business with cross section of protection and defense and response and whatnot. If an organization isn't on that and they pick best of breed for certain things, I want to get your perspective on how much gluing happens from a CISO perspective. How much code has to be written? How much automation has to be written? How many systems have to be put in place that allows you to actually bring that connection and context together?
Yeah, no, everybody's looking to the fabled one pane of glass, and it's a pretty hard thing to find. Even if you take a Microsoft platform approach, they haven't nailed the one pane of glass. Nobody's nailed that, and you see lots of people trying to then create those different ways of what you said, stitching things together. So, what logs does this particular tool generate? How do I get them into whatever SIEM solution I'm using or whatever solution my managed security service provider is using? How do I then get some context of what might be happening through other telemetry that we're gathering? How do I build a detection around that? When I've got that detection, what's the fidelity of that detection? How do we then respond to that, the more dispersed your tool set, I kind of, again, work on that theory that unless you've got a really well-resourced in-house security operations team, it's kind of hard to build as much automation in as you possibly can to, this endpoint is now doing this, the telemetry's been received by the SOC, the SOC's done their automated detection, the detections come up and they can then through automation automatically quarantine that particular device, shut down the user session, whatever it might be, to then allow remediation at a later time. The more things you introduce into that ecosystem, the harder it becomes.
Yeah, and my head explodes as I think about it.
I've lived through both. So, again, if I look at the NBN experience, we were so fortunate that we had a fantastic SOC, and I'm super proud of the guys that we had. Splunk run their global boss of the SOC competition every year. 2 years in a row, our SOC team won the Australian version, went over to Vegas on one of the years to compete in the global one. So they were kind of, one of Australia's top security operations centres at the time. And while I'd love to take so much credit for it, every single person in there was about 2,000 times smarter than I'm ever going to be. So they were a fabulous team, really talented people.
They're given the space and the opportunity to put their skills to use, which is half the battle, I think, if you're not constrained.
Smart. I love what they do.
Yep. Where was I going to go next? There was one more thing I wanted to touch on before we closed, and it's I mentioned it earlier. The I don't know what I guess VARs. That's right. People, you can go direct and buy from the vendor. You can buy through somebody else, and sometimes they help with deployment and integration, configuration, and management, monitoring, all that. What's I don't know if you have a view of that, because when we start talking about small, medium business and the have-nots, that world can hopefully, or perhaps, fill in some of the gaps and help. What's the state of the union in that regard?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, we've got a very active sort of group of organisations down here who do that reseller stuff and do it pretty well. They can then, as you said, help with the implementation side of things, and I've seen sort of full service offerings when then they will go and then operate that for you on an outsourced kind of basis. And sometimes you get them too entwined with your business where you bring them in to do some of your assurance and sort of governance work as well. So they'll go look around and say, oh, you've got a gap here and a gap here and a gap here. Just so happens we've got relationships with these vendors. We can procure those tools for you. And in fact, we can then implement those tools for you. And because you've only got a small team, how about we operate them for you as well? So I think from an assurance and a probity perspective, we've got to be careful about not putting everything into a single vendor in the ecosystem. And I've been really fortunate. I've worked with some fabulous service providers out there. There's some absolutely gun people out there doing some wonderful work. But I've also worked with a couple of absolute scallywags as well that have, they're very driven by the deal and not so much a partnership. And, I kind of look at, I am going to look at true partnership where I can learn from them. They can learn from us, share things, we bring them in. They're part of our team. If you can't get that partnership approach, I think, it's probably not worth the money that you're spending on the contract, because it's just transactional. So find the people who've got the right heart, the right mindset, and want to partner with you in the long term.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's plenty of scallywags that would love to tell you whatever the shiny thing is. If this, it will solve all of your problems. They may not have ever asked you what problems are, but they'll solve them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're preaching the choir. I'm actually this recording will get published after the newsletter I'm writing will be out, because the newsletter is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and this will probably come out next week. But
how many
it's on
people do
that
you think will
viewed the newsletter before this?
No, how many people will some of these conversations we've had upset?
Oh, how many people? Hopefully a lot.
Well, I think it's a fabulous conversation that we should be having.
Absolutely.
It's never going to stand still. We need to keep being as good as we can possibly be.
Mhm.
That means we've got to be vigilant. We've got to be proportionate. We've got to be forever on watch. This is not, security is not a project, whereas a lot of CIOs, I think, are kind of project driven. Everybody you talk to is talking about security uplift. Well, that's not security. Oh, well, maybe call it security uplift. That's okay. But it's security business as usual, which is we're never finished. We need to keep an eye on how are things changing from either what we've got in place or what bad guys are doing. And how do we get that balance as right as we possibly can, acknowledging that we can never be perfect. So any CISO that puts their hand on their heart and says, we're secure, they're kidding themselves. You shouldn't be in that role if that's what you say.
Yep. Yeah, but I'm going to close with kind of a loop back to the beginning, and we're close to the beginning where we're talking about the tribe that you're part of. I'm fortunate to be invited to a few CISO groups that are off the record as well. There are many, and you're right. The conversations in those groups, and this is what my newsletter is about, is those conversations happen, and they're honest. Right? They'll call out the scallywags. They'll call out the challenges they're having. They'll tell each other, hey, I just found a way to automate this thing that's been a gap for us for 3 years. Or we found this new tech piece that we replaced, and my team is not pulling their hair out. They have that conversation. You said it. They have those conversations. So my call to people listening, security leaders and CISOs listening, is if you're not part of one or more of those groups, find them. Find them. Ask. Go to a physical event. Go to a physical event. Find another CISO and ask them what group they're part of, and be part of those conversations, and you'll get the real scoop there.
Yeah. Or find people in your industry and get them together at your office. Go to a pub and have a drink and just sit there and whinge and moan about the fact that you haven't got enough money and everybody's questioning. Like, start a conversation. Starting, it's the hard bit. The conversation will flow, because what you're going to do is have a group of people around you who are of a similar minds and direction. And the good thing is if you don't all agree on everything, because that then generates really good conversation, really good discourse, and you start to then drill into what does this really mean? You've got 200 people in a room and they're all thinking the same thing. We're never going to change.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I was happy with my passive find a group. I love your proactive start your own and start drinking beer with your group.
Tragically, I don't drink anymore. I stopped drinking about 4 years ago, but I drink non-alcoholic beer, so I can still go to a pub, get it poured into a glass, and everybody thinks I'm drinking with them. The only difference is I get to drive home safely. They end up having a souvlaki, some dodgy stand at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, that's right. Souvlaki. Yes, or curry chips. Another favorite at 3 a.m.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not promoting drinking or not, but definitely the group. Get the group together.
Yeah.
Andrew, fantastic chatting with you. Appreciate you getting up this morning and joining me for this conversation. And hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you. But
you've frozen, so I don't know whether you're still
down
talking.
To Melbourne for the next CyberCon, or perhaps another event there. And
Sean, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to jump on my soapbox and evangelize about stuff that every time I speak about it, I realize just how crazy, sort of passionate I am about. This is important stuff. We are protecting things that can really, really matter. These are keeping roofs over people's head, putting food on their table. If we have a catastrophic event in a company and that company shuts down, the ripple effect of that out into the employees and the people who use the services of those companies can be catastrophic. So don't ever underestimate the importance of what it is that we do. It's really important. So find your tribe, be part of it, try and input into the industry and take as much back as you possibly can. It's okay. Good thing to do.
And pick up a guitar every now and then.
You have prompted me and shamed me. Well, my fingers have gone really soft. I haven't played for so long. So
There you go.
I know that it's going to hurt for a while.
It'll hurt, but the callus will come back, and I'm fairly certain you'll feel better for having picked up a guitar.
I will. I'll be frustrated that my brain knows where the fingers should go, but my fingers are going to protest, get there anywhere near quick enough. So I think easy songs for a while.
There you go. Andrew, fantastic, my friend. Have a great rest of the day, great weekend. And everybody listening, thanks for joining us and watching. Do connect with Andrew, and I'll go back to find your tribe. Do what you can to stay healthy personally and then help the business continue to protect itself. All right. So
Really,
thanks, everybody. Stay tuned for more Redefining Cybersecurity.
Thanks so much, Sean. I really appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Redefining Cybersecurity Podcast with Sean Martin. Please take a moment to rate the show and leave a comment. And remember to share the Redefining Cybersecurity Podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. Come back for more conversations and follow Sean Martin at seanmartin.com as he continues his journey towards redefining cybersecurity.